Advanced Heroquest, Tobaro's Bane, Part 3. It is 1563, and the Tylean city of Tobaro has become infested with Skaven, its city watch all but overwhelmed. Its citizens have resorted to barricading themselves into their homes as death stalks their streets. The city fathers have decided to implement a desperate plan suggested by their leader, Marco Broglio, and hired 4 adventurers to kill the leader of the Ratmen, the Grey Seer, Canker Darkheart, in an attempt to destabilize the occupying forces and garner them the upper hand. The 4 heroes and their allies from the City Watch have finally reached the lowest part of the lair of the Grey Seer. At the bottom of the secret staircase to his inner sanctum, they see a large, double door. They can hear the sound of clawed paws on flagstones beyond, and the air thrums with magical energies, laced with the odious smell of their putrescent foes. They ready their blades. With the rescue of Heinrich Lowen, the party still numbered 8, despite the loss of Lucky Heinz. It now consisted of the 4 heroes, Heinrich Lowen, Sven Hammerhelm, Magnus the Bright, and Terralian Leafstar, and the 4 remaining city guard, the Sergeant-at-Arms, Hans, the 2 spearmen, Thomas and Nicholas, and the last halberdier, Big Boy Kemmler. Three of the party still bore the wounds of their journey from the upper dungeon as they moved towards the double doors of the inner sanctum. Sven, Terralian, and Thomas had each suffered 2 wounds. Unperturbed, the party kicked open the doors ahead of them and surprised the Skaven within. A bringer of the word stood directly in front of the dwarf, and near a weapons rack stood another plague monk with a woe stave. In the centre of the room there was a third with 2 fetid blades, and to his rear were 4 more of his brethren, likewise armed. The room itself was the largest the party had yet entered, and was dominated by 4 large pillars that kept the subterranean roof above at bay. The room had a double door in each of its walls. Firstly Sven, and then Heinrich, struck out at the lead Skaven, but failed to kill him. From behind them stepped up Terralian, who loosed an arrow at the plague monk in the centre of the room and struck him stone cold, dead. The remaining Skaven piled forwards, gnashing their teeth with religious fervour, and they crashed into the knight and the stalwart dwarf, but they couldn't bring a single rusted blade to bear. Terralian moved to flank the onrushing Ratman. However, although he slipped past them, he didn't do any damage. Heinrich, meanwhile, sunk his blue blade into the nearest monk and cut him down, as Sven heft his warhammer into the bringer of the word and inflicted a single wound on the squealing bag of pus. The men behind moved up towards the ingress. Skaven then retaliated. A monk moved to step in front of the elf and, catching him by surprise, struck and knocked the elf off his feet. Terralian resorted to using his last fate point to avoid death and get back on his feet. The remaining Skaven once again failed to hurt both Heinrich and Sven. Sven, having witnessed Turalian's near-death experience, finally decided to quaff the healing potion he'd found on the first level of the dungeon before, and with renewed vigour coursing through his veins, smashed in the cranium of the bothersome bringer of the word. Turalian was then joined by Big Boy Kemler, who wasted no time in hacking down the nearest ratman with his pike. Nicholas the Spearman also moved to support the elf, and Hans likewise waded into the fray. Heinrich once again wet his blade with Skaven blood, taking down another rat before moving up. Turalian and then Sven too joined in the bloodshed and killed their last two remaining foes to secure the room. In the aftermath, Heinrich searched through the nearby weapons rack. Most of it was rusted and unusable, apart from a single shining sword that he quickly tossed to the wizard. Magnus himself was searching the room and found 40 gold crowns. Their comrades then moved to the 3 unopened double doors and ready to kick them all down. The dwarf and elf took the west door, Hans and Nicholas the north, and Thomas and Big Boy Kemler took the east. The door to the west led to a long, empty corridor that ended in a dead end. It had collapsed halfway down and appeared to be impassable. The door to the north also led to a long corridor. However, this ended in a left-hand turn. At the eastern door, the wounded spearman Thomas made way for Magnus the Bright, who quickly joined Big Boy Kemler, and together they pushed open the heavy doors. The doors opened up into another large room that must have once been used for smuggling. A large statue of the goddess Myrmidia dominated the room, but in her shadow skulked the hero's quarry, Canker Darkheart. The Greyseer was not alone. He was surrounded by his closest confidants, the senior plague monk, Poxbone, the sacred plague censer bearer, Odious Filch, the warp weaver, Poxskin, the champion of Nurgle, Bilious Blight, and 4 plague monks, each subservient to the will of the great white sorcerer. Magnus immediately grasped the inherent danger posed by such a potent cohort of enemies and hurled his last sachet of fire dust into their midst. It instantaneously killed 3 of the 4 plague monks and their leader, Poxbone. Additionally, it inflicted 2 wounds on both Canker Darkheart himself and the warp weaver, Poxskin. Big Boy Kemler then made way for Turalian and his trusty bow. The elf immediately took aim at the exposed Skaven sorcerer. His first arrow scored a critical hit that thrust deep into the Greyseer's flesh, and allowed him to follow it up with a second that struck the Greyseer straight between the eyes and left him a corpse on the floor. However, the loss of their leader did nothing to dampen the trapped rats, and the survivors prepared to wreak their bloody revenge. The warp weaver, Poxskin, decided to repay Magnus's gift in kind by pulling out his own sachet of fire dust and hurling it at his master's killer. The blast removed Turalian's last 2 wounds, knocking him out. It also inflicted a single wound on Magnus the Bright and the 2 nearby henchmen. Both Big Boy Kemler and the spearman Nicholas each suffered 2 wounds apiece. Seeing his chance to shine, Odious Filch charged forwards to attack the prone elf, but as he swung his censer, its chain caught in the doorframe, and he missed. Likewise, the last plague monk targeted Turalian, but his long woe stave too caught on the ingress. As these antics unfurled, Bilious Blight, the champion of Nurgle, slowly began to advance. They only had one chance to save the elf. Heinrich moved forwards, grasped his fallen comrade by the shoulders, and dragged him away to safety. Magnus quickly followed and prepared to perform a healing spell on the stricken elf. Sven took the opportunity to join Hans and Big Boy Kemmler at the door. He immediately put down odious filth with extreme prejudice. Hans followed the dwarf's lead and impaled the last plague monk on his sword, Pigsticker. The two then advanced into the room, followed by Big Boy Kemmler behind, and the two spearmen bringing up the rear. Seeing his foes cut down his fellow Skaven, the Warpweaver, Poxkin, pulled out a silver statue from under his robes and began to utter an ancient incantation. At the words of power, the statue melted in his hands, and suddenly the magic wielder transformed into a grotesque, fear-inducing hell pit abomination. It bellowed a bestial roar. Unfazed, Bilious Blight continued his slow advance towards the heroes. Hans led the charge into the beast, but was overcome with fear and couldn't bring himself to swing his blade at the enemy. Sven was next, but he had no trouble overcoming his revulsion and attacking the abomination. Unfortunately though, he found the writhing body disorientating and his hammer blow missed its target. Big Boy Kemmler saw a far greater danger than the abomination and put himself between the party and the skulking form of the champion of Nurgle, Bilious Blight. The wizard laid his hands upon the bare wounds of his fallen comrade and took his pain into himself, to being consumed by the strength of his own magic. With this, the elf was revitalized. The newly revitalized elf grabbed his last arrow from his quiver and ran to Thomas's side before loosing a shot into the beast. Once more his aim was true, and the transformed Warpweaver suddenly shivered before dropping down dead, its body melting away into the stone floor. Behind them, Heinrich now raced to join the fray, but he had arrived too late to fight against the beast. And so finally, the only remaining foe was the champion of Nurgle, Bilious Blight, who now moved to attack Big Boy Kemmler. The champion of Nurgle dispatched the henchman with a single swing of his axe, before moving towards Thomas. The spearman quickly made way for Sven, who thwacked the fly-headed devotee of chaos, but only inflicted a single wound. Nicholas, the other spearman, moved up to attack, but neither men could land a blow. Behind them, Hans, the sergeant-at-arms, yelled words of encouragement, but could do nothing more than that. With Bilious' attention drawn to the fore, Heinrich attempted to come at the servant of Nurgle from behind. Magnus the Bright, his magic spent, moved away from the ensuing melee, knowing that he lacked the skills to tackle this potent servant of chaos. The champion of Nurgle realized that someone was attempting to sneak up on him and, ignoring the warriors ahead of him, moved to attack Heinrich. There was nothing that Bilious Blight hated more than cowards that attacked from behind. It took a single blow from the sign of chaos to take out another member of the party, forcing Heinrich to spend a fate point to avoid death. The spearman, Thomas, moved to try and impale the Lord of Nurgle, but once more failed to strike true. Sven, too, attacked again, but missed, as did Nicholas. Turali and the elf moved to the rear of the Plague Knight and loosed his last arrow, causing an additional 2 wounds. Hans, the sergeant at arms, then moved up to protect the elf from any potential retribution. Magnus moved to Heinrich's rear, ready to drag him to safety if the worst came to pass. Bilious Blight once more struck Heinrich with his axe and all but killed him, forcing the knight to spend his last fate point to avoid certain death. However, the champion of Nurgle's killing spree was suddenly and resoundingly put to an end as Sven Hammerhelm, yelling with all his might, caved in Bilious Blight's skull with a mighty hammer blow, felling the corrupt Chaos Knight where he stood. Suddenly, from outside the room came a high-pitched laugh. Magnus led the way to investigate. He saw a sprightly Skaven, another grey seer by his apparel. As soon as the rat spied the wizard, he threw the latch beside him, and a large portcullis dropped down in front of him, before the Skaven beat a hasty retreat up the corridor and around the corner out of sight. However, the task was complete. Canker, Darkheart and his inner circle were dead, and all that was left was for the party to go to the tavern, raise a glass to Lucky Heinz and Big Boy Kemmler, and then spend their mountain of gold. The group also looked forward to claiming their rich rewards from the city fathers. However, the appearance of a second Grey Seer had been disconcerting. Something was not right, and the party would not find out the sour truth of it until they returned to the surface and the machinations of men.